Good morning. I want to reiterate what the judge said about the importance of your job, and thank you very much for your attention. I know you got the thing in the mail and you all said, jury duty. And everyone gets that, feels that way. But I think sitting here for almost 2 weeks, you recognize how important this is. And it's what makes our country different than anywhere else in the world, really, because we have true justice. Certainly not perfect, but I don't think anybody can think of anything better because the citizens, we decide right and wrong. We make the decisions with the assistance of the court who tells us what the law is, and you apply it. There's no bias, and there's no... So we kept asking, you know, any problems deciding this case? Are you in favor of one side or the other? Because everybody wants a fair umpire, a fair referee to call, see it like it is, call it like it is. So on behalf of everybody in the courtroom, thank you very much. Truly. So why are we here? Mr. Wolkoff rented a unit at Sunshine Storage. There was an accident waiting to happen. It was basically a death trap. But he didn't know it going in, because he didn't realize that the ledger board on the north wall, from the middle on, was only on with basically one post. That didn't even go up into the ledger board, it was only to the drywall. So if you looked at it, it would go up to the drywall, you wouldn't know it's even holding up the ceiling. And at the very end, it had like 3 little nails. That's it. That's it. And as he's moving his stuff out, he's taking his own stuff out, his own 2x4s off the wall, his own shelving off the wall, which he has the right to do, it's his stuff. Probably caused enough movement. Remember Mr. Fisherino said it was precarious, meaning waiting to happen? That was enough. Crushes down on him. Crushes his life. Crushes his health. And destroys him. In a split second, boom, in the blink of an eye, he goes from being independent, self-made, healthy, happy, crushed. Literally and figuratively. Destroyed. And along with it, his lifelong partner, Julie. She stopped being an individual who had had a life and a job and enjoyed herself to being a full-time nurse and caretaker. From that point, till death do them part. So that's why we're here. So, what did the defendant do wrong? It's so much. It's funny because we hear now with Fink and the other guys. Who are they? You hear any evidence in this case about those folks? Well, the defendant wants to blame everybody but themselves. So all of a sudden they throw out those names, but they didn't prove anything. And they had the burden, just like we showed negligence on them, they had the burden of showing negligence on anybody else. And think about it. Every expert that testified in this case, even the defense experts, what they said, well, didn't look like any engineer designed that. Didn't look like any general contractor designed that. The defense contractor, Garofalo, would you do it that way? No. Their expert engineer, would you do it that way? No. Nobody would do it that way. There are no engineering plans. There are no plans for the loft, no permitting. They don't exist. The as-built plans, they show the changes, but they don't show any loft. Because it was done by the owners of Sunshine Storage on their own. And we know that because we saw the certificate of occupancy, and it said owner, J.W. Schmaltz, and contractor. Owner. So he hired the people to build it, but he's the one that pulled his permits. That's why it has his name on it. And the reason he didn't have any permits or plans is they don't exist. So the city of Deerfield Beach. Remember they said, look, we have in our main office these little cards. If permits were pulled for that loft, we would have it because it goes back to the 1960s. We would have evidence of something existing. There weren't any. Nowhere. So we asked the defendant, hey, get us your permits, show us your blueprints, show us your plans, show us the engineering drawings, show us something. Well, What did he say when we took his deposition a few years back? Remember that? I had to read it out. I didn't have them. I never have them. I don't have them. And what does the defendant say here in court? For the first time in court, what does he say? Oh, hurricane, blew him away. For the first time. Well, you have to decide what version is accurate. What he's been saying throughout the litigation under sworn testimony, or what he came up with today. So the evidence is so overwhelming and so clear. What does the defendant do? They say, well, we can't just go in there and say, yeah, we had shoddy construction. It was an accident waiting to happen. Didn't meet the building code. Didn't have permits. Problem. So what they do is they spend from the evidence of the witnesses that did testify, because we know there are other experts that you heard about, close to $250,000 in experts to say, well, it wasn't us. Sunshine Storage didn't do anything wrong. It must have been Mr. Wolkoff, because even though he's a general contractor and he knows how to take out a piece of wood without butchering it, just like the other column was taken out without butchering it, we're going to have him butchering it away and pulling it down and having the whole thing smash on him, and we'll blame him. That's what we'll do. Who can we get? Well, let's get some experts to say this. Well, what about the building code? Well, maybe we'll get the jury to forget about the building code. We'll blame it all on Mr. Wolkoff. And then we can even get that guy there, Romansky, biomechanical, whose opinions have been excluded in 2 courts, and pay him like $80,000, who does 95% of his work for the defense, testifies for defense lawyers throughout the country. We will get him in to ignore all the evidence of where all the witnesses say he was and the position he was found in, and say, well, no, notwithstanding that, he must have been up against this wall, yanking out that post. That's why we're here. Accountability, responsibility. The defendant needs to be accountable and responsible for the big mistake it made. When a person goes and rents a unit to do carpentry work or anything else, expect it to be safe and secure. Don't expect the ceiling to come down. It's just not right. And it ruined this man. Ruined it. It's destroyed his life. For real. A lot of times people say, oh, that's terrible. Oh, well, that's just horrible what happened. Somebody's dog died. Oh, that's horrible. Somebody didn't get a raise. That's just terrible. Well, consider the evidence in this case. He lost his memory. He lost his cognitive abilities. He lost his eyesight in one eye, half of it in the other eye. He lost his penis. To urinate, he has to do it through a little machine where he hits the button and hopes he gets to the bathroom before he urinates all over his pants. He's got a drop foot on both legs. He can't walk. When he can, because he's stubborn as hell, he does it with a walker and with a cane to get somewhere else. And you ask him, how you doing, man? How do you feel? I'm great. I'm doing great. That's what he tells people. Look at it. It was pretty good. The reality is when that door closes and he's by himself and he's in his head, you don't want to live like that. Think about it. When people say, what's the most important thing? What's the most important thing? What is it? Family, health, God, top 3, all the time. Right? How's your health, Mr. Wolkoff? Julie Wolkoff, what happened to your family, Julie Wolkoff? That's why we're here. Let's look at some of the evidence. Obviously, can't go over 2 weeks of evidence in an hour and a half, but I'm going to summarize some of the things. If I forget to mention some things, you have it in your notes and your collective memories. Because the jury becomes one body, as it were. We all work together, talking about what you saw, what you heard, and coming up with what's right and what's wrong. This is the north wall. Originally, it had 1, 2, 3 posts on this side here, and then it had 1, 2, and there was another one here, 3, 4 anchor bolts holding it up. Then the center ledger board only had like 1 nail here. And it was held up by this post, which is probably C2, and then nothing, except for 3 little cut nails here. That's all building code violation. Even this part here that stayed up, it's a building code violation. You're supposed to have a post every 16 inches. 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 And if you're going to use the bolts, then you have to have a bolt separated depending on the testimony. We saw that one engineer report had it every 12 inches using those metal pins that go in about 3 inches into the concrete or a bolt. Mr. Pistorino said 8 inches into the grout. The plan we saw from the Canale thing said every 12 inches on center with Hiltis. Okay? So if you're going to use that, you got to use them separated out. So consider this. They want to blame the engineer, right? Licensed engineer. What licensed engineer would say, yeah, this is my plan. I'm going to have 4 little bolts here, a stud here, and then 1 nail here, then 1 stud here, and then 3 nails here. Yeah, and consider that. I'm going to go to the building department. Here's my plan. This is what I'm offering. They could get arrested. That's crazy. That's not engineering. That's shoddy construction. What contractor would ever even build that? I want you to think about it. I want you to build this death trap. So my tenants can come in here and have a whole ceiling with 1.5 tons of weight come crashing down on them. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to do that. Makes no sense. Right. So what do we know from the evidence? This column, which became C2, was moved from its original location over here. Now, we know from the evidence exactly where these posts were. Why do we know that? Number 1, because there's a shadow everywhere a post was moved. If it was moved, it left a shadow, either a gray or a white shadow. And you saw it in the pictures, and I'll show them to you again. Number 1. Number 2, the proof is in the pudding. You saw the pudding. The ledger board in its entirety, we went down there with Mr. Pistorino and we looked at it, remember? And we said, everybody look at the marks, where we had marks, where the ledger board was being held up by the wood. The marks were there. How many marks did we see? We saw a mark for C3. We knew that it was held here in the northwest corner. We saw where it had been supported in the past, here. And then we saw where C2 currently was. That's it. We saw the nail holes in the corner here. We saw this nail hole here in the center. And we saw where the 4 bolts were. That's it. No plans, no permits, not enough bolts, no bolts on this side, and 1 stud holding it up. What happened to the stud? And we're going to discuss this in a little more detail. The original layout had 4 storage units. You saw the as-built plans where they had the doors. Right? The remodeled layout became what was Mr. Wolkoff's unit, which is a big rectangle. And that's when they moved this 2x4 over. And even their expert, Mr. Rodriguez, agreed. You have that thing. This is from the actual trial. post that used to be on this hip joint by the door towards the northwest of the second door was no longer there.
That's right. This new brace that we're calling C2 was added at that time.
All right. And this new brace, C2, that we're calling, did not touch the ledger board.
It went against the drywall, sandwiched in between, as we have seen.
Not into the ledger.
Not directly into the ledger, but compressing through the drywall, and we have seen the marks on both.
And then C3, which is this one over here, this one actually did touch up against the ledger board and was attached to it, right?
It was originally installed.
So as you can see, the post that was originally where the shadow shows over here, when they made this change in 1998 or 1999, according to Mr. Schmoltz, was moved over, leaving the shadow to where C2 actually was at the time of the accident. And we know from the photographs that were taken by Mr. Wolkoff after he set up his shop after moving in, he had purchased the desk and the shelving in the back from the carpenter that worked there before him. And that's really interesting too, because now you're in trial. For the first time, the defendant says, well, it was for a church, and we don't require contracts for the church. Well, what's the evidence? The evidence is that a carpenter who did some volunteer work for his church, work for the church, was in that unit. And we wanted to be able to disprove what the defendant's trying to say, that Mr. Wolkoff removed these posts. Because we have these photographs that show the posts just aren't there. To use plain talk, they ain't there. They're just not there. So we said, it's pretty easy. Let's get the carpenter that was there before. He's going to say, this is what my unit looked like. End of story. So we asked for it. And just like the building plan and the permit, we asked, please provide the name, last known address, phone number, and any and all contact information for each and every tenant who had rented the subject bay that collapsed on January 3, 2009 at Sunshine Storage before Stephen Wolkoff rented it. Answer. Sunshine Storage does not have this information. Sworn to. July of this year. Sworn to. But it didn't sound too good for trial from the jury. Just like I didn't have those plans, and I'm not going to give you the plans. It didn't sound too good. They came up with a hurricane for that. And on this one, they come up with a church story. Who are you going to believe? It's up to you. Here's what his unit looked like. There's the desk. Here's the C3. No posts there. None. Zero. Here's C2. Here's C2 here. That's it. That's it. That's all they have on that wall. Look at the corner. No posts. No posts. None. None exist. The ledger board has evidence that those other posts didn't exist. By the way, here's a shadow of where the post used to be that was moved over. Just like Mr. Rodriguez, our own expert, said. Yeah, it used to be over here, they moved it over there. And here's the proof that even C2 did not go into the ceiling. Here's a close-up of it. It's just pushed into the drywall. So if a person looked at it, they'd say, that can't be supporting the ceiling, it's up against the drywall. But you know what happened? We heard the experts talk about it. They took a shortcut. They didn't want to cut through the drywall to get into the ledger board and hammer it in the right way. So they just pressed the post up against the drywall. Shortcuts cause injuries and death. what they should have done, which is what they did with C3, which, by the way, stayed out. Cut through the drywall. You cut through the drywall. Didn't do it. This is the same shelving in the back, but from the south wall. So you can get the perspective of it. Everybody see it? So we did a walkthrough. Remember, Mr. Schmaltz said I had 6 of these. I have 6 of these posts in the unit, holding up the whole unit. Well, that is a building code violation. They're supposed to be every 16 inches apart, unless you have them calculated by an engineer. And if you calculate them with an engineer, it's supposed to be every 4 feet or 4.5 feet. Every 4 or 4.5 feet. They didn't have that. They didn't have it calculated by an engineer. And if not by an engineer, it has to then be by code, which is every 16 inches. Every 16 inches. 6 posts doesn't do it. But we went through those posts. Can we do the Rodriguez posts?
Objection, Your Honor. Overemphasizes one witness over the other.
Overruled. Can you all see the TV? Okay, you take those down, please.
Now we can see where the post used to be, because there's like a gray shadow, right? You can tell from this post there's just a gray shadow, right?
Well, some of them is a great shadow, some of them are whiter shadows.
Yeah, but here on photograph
Yes.
16J,
Yes.
we can see there was a gray shadow here before the modification was against the plans, right?
Oh, yeah, you took that down. I was going to show you. Yes, correct.
Okay. But when it was taken down, it left the gray mark on the wall, didn't it?
Yes.
And we can see it.
Yes, sir.
In fact, I'll show you Appendix Exhibit 17JJ. There's a little mark there where C3 used to be.
Show that one. I will. I've seen this many times.
And here's a bad resolution of where C3 was after it was taken down. 17 KK.
That's that much.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah, yeah.
You can see it?
Barely, yeah.
That's the gray shadow?
Yes.
Yeah, let me show the jury. So we know that when a post is taken down, it actually makes a mark.
Left a stain on the wall, yes.
So let's look at the columns that were in the unit.
I mean the braces.
Let's go through them.
Now we're going to go through the braces in the unit holding up the loft, just like Mr. Schmaltz had said. He had 6 posts holding up the loft. In fact, I want to make sure I get that language right. The loft was held by 6 supports. That's what he said. Okay, let's go over those. You ready?
Yes, sir.
So let's look at the columns that were in the unit.
You mean the braces.
So let's go to let's see where the shadows are. Let's go to the doorway. We know in the doorway that there was a shadow, right?
Yes, sir.
But that's not supporting the northeast. That's not supporting the north wall.
No, that was for the partition. That wasn't supporting anything.
All right, so that might be, let's say that's one side. Okay?
Yes.
Which one? How many? What?
There's a brace.
There's one brace. Let's go to the corner, northeast corner. We have 2 in the northeast corner, right?
Yes.
Okay, then we go to
I cannot tell exactly which one that is.
C3, that's the one that remains standing on the north wall.
Yes. I think it's the C3, but because of all of this stuff, I can't tell exactly.
Let's want to give you a reference.
That's a good reference.
Okay. Yes.
Yes.
So that would be 4, right?
Yes.
And then we have C2.
Yes, that was signed later, we all agree.
Correct. That's 5.
Yes.
And then we know that there was 1 here at some point. Correct?
Yes.
That's 6.
Yes.
When we asked him about the building code, Mr. Rodriguez said this about the building code. You have that clip? 2318.12, page 5.
Same objection, Your Honor, still overemphasizing.
Oh, he said he wrote this section. This is their expert. 2318.1.2 spacing. Snow shall be spaced not more than 16 inches on center, unless designed for rational analysis as a system of columns and beams by a registered professional engineer or registered architect proficient in structural design.
Correct.
That's accurate, right?
In fact, I think I wrote that section.
All right. You agree with it?
Yes. Because if properly designed, your braces can be at whatever holds the load.
Yes. One stud should not hold up the entire ceiling bracelet.
I don't think one stud holding up the entire ceiling is the best way to go, which is why I think there was more there originally.
And can we go please to page 4 of the Rodriguez? Your page 4. This is when I asked him, I want to do this system. I want to use this system of, I want to use this system of engineering with, you know, a few studs here, a few bolts on one side, no bolts on the other side, and one stud. What do you think about it? Here's what he said. We used 1, 2, 3, 4 anchor sleeves with bolts and another stud for the northwest side of the wall. Then, I don't want to use any more bolts for the middle. I don't want to use any more bolts from this side to the northeast wall. And I just want to use another stud. You wouldn't recommend it, would you?
No, I would not.
Of course not. It's a death trap. When we asked on page 8 of Rodriguez, if anybody explained to him why this type of system was used, here's what he said. The defense expert.
Same objection, Your Honor.
Overruled, sir.
No one explained to you why bolts were used on one part of the ledger board and not on the other two parts.
No. I don't think anybody knows.
That's what he said. So, you can see, they have to come up with some reason other than we really messed this up and created a real problem for Mr. Wolkoff, and we caused it, and we ruined his life, and we ruined Julie's life. So, they tried to come up with a defense, as Mr. Wolkoff has all these items from the ceiling that came down on him. 3,100 pounds. This is what was able to be measured because Mr. DeSorma had taken some things out before. There's actually more weight than that. That's 1.5 tons, over 1.5 tons on him. Over 1.5 tons. Consider the evidence of Mr. Wolkoff having less than a second to see his life about to crumble. Wow! And all those items that were up here came sliding down into that wall, and that wall scraped it down. Yeah, there's going to be scrapes on the wall, of course it is. 3,100 pounds and a bunch of junk, including glass and machinery and equipment came down on that wall. You know, that reminds me, when you look at the pictures where they try to say, oh, look, the scratches line up, take a look how they measured it. Look how they measured the post, and look at the numbers. They actually measured the post from the top down, and they measured the wall from the bottom up, so the numbers don't correlate. Ask yourselves, why did they do that? Ask yourselves, why did they do that? All this on Mr. Wolkoff. They couldn't even get him out with a jack. When we asked, remember I made a big deal asking Mr. Rodriguez, bless you, when that ceiling came down, boom, that's it, he's not moving. Remember that? Because the next expert, Matt Carroll followed up the expert we heard from yesterday, Romansky, he's got Mr. Wolkoff trapped underneath there, and he's moving around though with 3,100 pounds on him. He's going to move around and go to the exact opposite direction, so Mr. Romansky can say, well, all the witnesses got it wrong. He was actually first with his feet up against the wall, even though everybody found him with his feet not up against the north wall. He found his feet southwest. Okay, so I use this little doll here from this Fred from Scooby-Doo. My law partner's daughter's toy. They have him, if this is the north wall, they have him this way, and then what they're saying, this is the north wall, is that he's yanking it, pulling it out, and it comes down on him this way. And he's up against the wall, and that's how he should have been found, right? That's what the expert says. But the witnesses all found him this way. The opposite side. And we went through every one of the testimony. You heard it. Every single one. Tell us every deposition you considered, Mr. Romansky. Tell us every single one. Every single one was wrong. All of them. All the eyewitnesses. They couldn't even pry him out with a jack, but they were all wrong. Because Mr. Romansky got paid $80,000 to say that the defense theory was incorrect. I submit to you that's let's go to Mr. Rodriguez's clip on that.
No objection, Your Honor.
Overruled, sir.
Page 10, half a second.
Half a second. Oh, a little more, because the scrape at the very beginning would have delayed another fraction of a second.
So, 1,001. More than that.
Yeah.
It's done.
Yeah.
Where was trapped there? If you trapped there, that's moving.
I said that myself.
Right.
Yes.
Half a second, boom, trapped there, it's done.
Right.
Wherever he wants, that's where he is.
All right.
You agree with that?
Yes.
That's an opinion with a reasonable degree of engineering probability.
Yes.
Do you hear that? Yes! I agree with that. Well, there's one person that doesn't. The one whose opinions have been disqualified, who was an attorney, who was an industrial engineer, and does biomechanics, and will say what is convenient for the defense, I submit. Now, we know that a person looking at C2 that was held up would not know that it was holding up the ceiling because it was on the driveway. So no one would ever know that. Can we show what Mr. Rodriguez says about that?
No objection, Your Honor.
Overruled.
A person looking at C2 and seeing that it was up against the drywall would have no way of knowing that it actually held up the ceiling. No way to know that, right? No way. So what was it being held up by? This is C3 here. The middle ledger board is being held by this little piece here on the one side. And C2 on the other. And then the far corner, just this little piece. That's what it's hanging on. That's called an accident waiting to happen. And it did. C2 didn't fall down. It actually stayed on the wall. It slid. Now, the defense argues, well, there wasn't a complete... It's not booming in every direction. It was only in one direction. Take a look at the picture. It's an evidence. 17 acres. Every direction. That's what the picture says. Picture says every direction. Take a look at it. It was held up by 2 cut nails, which are temporary nails. These are supposed to be bolted into the wall for strength, not with temporary cut nails, which is what they use. No contractor and no engineer would design that. Weight restrictions. You would think, if you're going to have a loft, and it's a commercial loft, it's not a residential attic. Okay? Commercial loft, storage units, big deal. That you're going to tell people, look, you can put only a certain amount of weight up there. You really can't put a lot of weight up there, or you can put a lot of weight up there, but these are the restrictions. It should be in writing. It should be in the contract. You should tell people. This is what stayed up over the loft in Joey DeSormo's unit. A sofa. We had to get those things up there with a forklift. Guess who owned the forklift? Sunshine Storage. Oh, here's a forklift so you can store these heavy items and get them up there. Over Mr. Wolkoff's head. Like a sword. Remember that story about the sword that comes down? The Damocles sword? All this stuff comes down. Boat engines. Here's part of the ceiling that didn't come down. Take a look. This is from the Joey DeSormo side. Didn't come down. Look at the quality of that construction. Look at the quality of that construction. Doesn't take an engineer to figure this out. That's shoddy. That's nasty. What reasonable person would say this is good, this is healthy, this is safe, this is secure? Well, that system they have is safe, that's secure, that's good. I'm proud of that. Who could be proud of that? It's a death trap. Strong words, but that's what the evidence shows. I mean, the burden of proof is this. More likely than not, that's what happened. Greater weight of the evidence. More likely than not, that's what happened. Probably happened that way. If I were a scale of justice, what I would have to show is more likely than not, 51 versus 49. I tilt it to one side. Tilt it to one side. That's it. Plaintiff wins. That's all I have to do. What's the evidence in this case? It's like that. It's beyond the exclusion of a reasonable doubt, which is a criminal standard, which we don't need. They have the same burden to prove their defenses. They got to prove somebody saw Mr. Wolkoff pulling out that C2, and it was the only reason that thing crashed on it, because it was properly and safely built.
Overruled. The jury will determine the conflicts in the evidence.
What did they show you? Who did they bring in? Well, they brought Mr. Coney. Mr. Coney comes in. Mr. Coney, what'd you see? Well, there were some 2x4s over here where these little X's are, I think every 2 feet apart. We know that's not accurate. Then I saw him somewhere in the middle here. That would be where he has his tools, the shelving, taking out 2x4s with screws. And we know his shelving, the shelves where he had his stuff, a lot of those were with screws. Mr. Rodriguez admitted that. They're expert. Actually, I have the clip. I may not show it. C3. You see him taking down C3? No. Draw an X there. This. Do you see him taking down C2? No. And we know those were nails anyway. So what's he taking down? He's taking down his stuff, like he's supposed to. By the way, Mr. Coney's in the Kiwanis Club with the owner of Sunshine Storage and recruited him. They're very, very close acquaintances. When I asked him, what did you think of Mr. Wolkoff? So I didn't personally dislike him, and I didn't personally, he wasn't my friend, didn't see him at the hospital, didn't send him a note, didn't call him. We actually called the defendant and spoke to him several times. And the defendant said, talk to my lawyer. That's Mr. Coney. Mr. DiDomenico. This is what he was talking about. He never went inside. when Mr. Wolkoff was pulling out this stuff. You heard him say that. I heard him working inside. I heard banging. I heard things being moved. Remember? I never went inside. Well, what'd you see? Well, he had taken out the supports. Well, what supports were those? Oh, this. The desk. 3 of those. 8 feet up against the ceiling. That's what he said. And then, in his deposition, because we talked about his deposition, I said, well, remember when you said that there were all these posts every 2 feet on the north wall? He said, well, that's the way it's supposed to be. And that's the way he has it in his unit at Sunshine Storage. Every 2 feet. Now, Mr. Wolkoff. They talk about, opening statement. Defense lawyer comes up here and says, well, here it is. The paramedic, Harris, comes down and asks him his knee. What were you doing? And Mr. Wolkoff allegedly says, oh, I was pulling off the support studs when they all came down. That's what he said. Well, let's see what Mr. Harris actually said.
Objection, Your Honor, the written sizes.
Oh, Ralston.
2x4? And where did you find those 2x4s that were already in the unit? Answer, they were right on the floor as we walked in. On the floor. C2 and C3 weren't on the floor, they were on the wall. That's the stuff he was taking out. Do you have the clip? Yeah.
Okay, where did you find those 2x4s that were already in the unit? They were right on the floor as soon as we walked in.
Did Mr. Wolkoff tell you how this happened or what caused it? Let's play that one.
All right. Did Mr. Wolkoff tell you how this happened or what caused it? I basically, when I asked him what had happened, he said that he was removing himself from the bay itself, and he was removing everything that he basically had in there and was taking things off the wall.
Okay. Did he ever point to you what he was taking off the wall?
He just told me that the 2x4s that were on the ground.
On the
He told
ground.
you that he'd taken those off the
Yes,
wall?
sir.
Next one. What wall?
Did Mr. Wolkoff indicate to you which wall he had taken those 2x4s off of?
He did not specifically state what wall, no.
Okay.
That's it. That's the basis of their opinion that Mr. Wolkoff took C2 off with a crowbar and a hammer and was beating the daylights out of it, making a mess out of it. Yes. Now this one was removed before when they did the changes in 1998, 1999, and it was moved to its current location. This one, C2, had a ton and a half of weight smashed into it, causing it to bring handle on the bottom. Well, no, it wasn't that. But it was Mr. Wolkoff really wanted this $8 piece of wood. When you compare it to C3, remember, Mr. Wolkoff's a general contractor, folks. He has tools to take out nails. He knows how to do it. He works with wood. General contractor took out C3. Didn't butcher it. Why would anyone butcher a post if they want to use it? And he's going to move to another unit. Remember, he wasn't leaving Sunshine Storage. He was moving to a bigger unit. So he's going to steal wood and put it in the other unit? That makes sense. I'm going to steal this $8 piece of wood from Sunshine Storage and put it in my new unit. But first I'm going to butcher it. So they got him on the ground in the little animation which you saw. This is the north wall. We got this one. If the post is here, to my right, they got him to the side of the post with a crowbar on the side, you can all see, and he's hammering this way, on the side. hammering this one on the side. Okay? So his leg's out on the other side, over here. Okay. Now, it doesn't take a genius to figure out, and he's a bodybuilder, he's a weightlifter. If you're going to use strength to pull anything out, there's a machine in the gym that's just like that. It's the seated rowing machine. You put it in the middle, you straddle it, and you pull forward. So you get leverage. Boat anchor. A lot of people boat in Florida. Imagine sitting in the front of the boat, pulling it up this way. Who would do that? You pull up the anchor, feet on the side, you bring it right up to the middle. Not the mechanical guy, who's supposed to know how people act and how they move. Not him. He would have everybody doing it this way. And then at the gym, he would have everybody doing the cable machine that I just showed sideways. Why? Because that's what the defendant needs to show so that he can try to put some comparative negligence on Mr. Wolkoff. Disagree with all the witnesses, disagree with common sense, disagree with all the evidence. Pay $250,000 for it. CO permit. Exhibit 13. This is a certificate of occupancy. Let's look at who it was issued to. Owner, Schmaltz, J.W. Schmaltz, contractor, owner. When they did the canali conversion, that's the one at 12 inches on center for the loft. Remember that one? Let's go to that one. This is the permit in 1986 that they requested it. Part A? Yeah, bring it up. Building contractor, Bill Schmaltz. Phone number. That's his number down there. Turns on storage. Makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, who else would build a loft the way it was built? But he wants to blame the professionals that would never build it that way. His own expert, remember Garofalo, the contractor? The thin man? You wouldn't build it like that, would you? Oh, no. Mr. Black, the code enforcement person, would you ever approve anything like this? Would this ever be approved? No. Does it look like any engineer ever did this, Mr. Pistorino? Mr. Rodriguez? Oh, no. Oh, no. Weight restrictions. Mr. Schmaltz, did you ever put restrictions on weight? No, I never did. Mr. DeSormo, you saw when Mr. DeSormo testified. Did he ever tell you about any weight restrictions? No. When we asked Mr. Rodriguez, should he have done so, here's what he said.
No objection.
The owner did not provide his tenants with any warnings about how much weight to put on the loft. Were you aware of that?
I know.
And you think it's a good idea that they do that, right? That they provide that you would recommend it?
Yes.
It should have been done.
Yes.
Let me go to the workbench a second. Can you give me from the workbench section, pages, the last 2 pages of DeSormo, please? This is Mr. DeSormo explaining that the workbench and the shelving in the back were already there when the other tenant before Mr. Wolkoff had it.
When that gentleman that leased that spot before Mr. Wolkoff, did you ever actually go into his his unit?
When he was there, yeah, it seemed like there was more space and we would talk inside.
Okay, all right. And it's your recollection that he had a workbench there along the north wall?
Yes.
Okay.
Workbench was already there. Now let's talk about the shelving in the back.
Because what I'm trying to determine here in exhibit number 5, do you recall whether or not this structure there in picture number 5, that's the east wall, those pieces of lumber were there? Do you recall them being?
I don't know if the pieces of lumber were there, but the built part, it seems as though the back wall, which would be the east wall, did have structure to it, and he would store wood there.
Okay.
Possibly store things there.
There it is. That's the condition it was in when Mr. Wolkoff took it over. There aren't any books there. Nothing. You saw that I wrote down all the amounts of money that the folks made. I have it in the chart here. Mr. Rodriguez, $55,000. Mr. Garofalo, $98,000.
Wow.
Mr. Dr. Romanski.
Objection, Your Honor.
What's the objection, sir?
A
I understand.
comment by Mr.
All right, Mr. Wolkoff, don't say anything during the course of the closing argument, sir. Go ahead, Mr.
Dr. Romanski, $79,000. And we know that they had the one expert that they did the animation, they didn't call him, so we couldn't get that number out. But, and Dara Thomas, who was the engineer before Mr. Rodriguez, we didn't discuss that number because it's not in evidence. So about $250,000 to defend a lawsuit, put a little blame on somebody other than Sunshine Storage. We're not doing what we should have done. Well, Rodriguez said something really interesting. He said, yeah, I go to the bank and I have pride when I tell the tellers. You should be happy I designed your building because your ceiling overhead is secure and safe. Mr. Wolkoff wasn't so lucky. Let me turn to the matter of damages for you. The instructions are very clear. The Wolkoffs get their economic losses, which we've talked about in detail with experts showing you the losses that they had. They also get damages for pain and suffering, mental anguish, loss of enjoyment of life, disability, disfigurement, pain, loss of her husband, loss of society, loss of comfort, loss of care. That's what the law says. Now, who's Stephen Wolkoff? Born in New York, lost his daddy when he was 8 years old. Mom brought him up with his brother, very poor. Had to sleep outside when it was hot in the summer, in the balcony, because it was so hot. Little chance of ever really making it. Little chance. But he's determined to fight. So he said, you know what, I'm a pretty good athlete. I'm going to play basketball. And I'm going to play better than anybody in the neighborhood. And I'm going to play better than anybody in high school. And I'm going to get myself into college. I'm going to study. I'm going to be somebody. You know what? He did. Self-made. Picked himself up. Made a nice living. Julie. She'd been abandoned as a child, living in foster care. Became very mature at a very young age. These two individuals at one point met at a party in LaGuardia Airport, a dance party. She saw him. She said, that's the one. He may not know it yet, but that's the one. And he was. They fell in love. They dated. They hung out for quite some time. And they got married. And they both worked together to make a very nice life for themselves and for their children. Stephen's always been very strong, very independent. He's a fighter. He was bodybuilding. He was a triathlete. Not the little triathlons, the real ones, the Ironman, where you swim 3 miles and then you ride a bicycle for 100 and something miles. And then after that, as if that weren't enough, you got to run a marathon. And he placed very high. One time we heard he came in second, he was upset. Came in second, oh, terrible. Competing. Bodybuilding. Taking care of his body, his mind, his business. Successful general contractor. He had retired and then he came back and worked again. And we heard that from 2005 to 2009, when he had this tragedy, he was working. In fact, after he got hurt, his son had to come in and finish the work that he had because he couldn't. So that's the man. That's who we're talking about. That man. Independent, strong, athletic. Depended all his life on himself to make it, and his athleticism to make it. Very important to him. His wife, working as a travel agent, taking care of the family, being a wife, traveling, going to dinner, enjoying themselves, no problems. Everything's great. Consider the evidence of all this. Picture the evidence in your life. Their life before this accident. They're happy. They got normal problems. January 3rd, 2009. Their life was shattered and crushed. In the blink of an eye, like that. Nothing happens. Everything changed. Stephen goes from being independent to dependent. To being self, from being self, to being I need help. And it started that second. He's on the ground, he's screaming, help me, help me. Please, somebody help me, I'm dying here. And he was. He was dying. The wife testified when she got to the hospital, what's wrong with Stephen? I thought he broke his legs. Well, we're sorry, ma'am. It's not just a broken leg. He's lost a lot of blood. He's in respiratory failure. He's breathing through a tube right now. We got a machine breathing for him. He's got a hemorrhage in his pelvic area. By the way, his pelvic is completely crushed, like a roasted pig on a slate. His pelvic area is so inflamed with blood that we've got to do something to release it. His bones are all cracked. His pelvis is sideways. Record amounts of blood and fluids given to him to try to keep him alive. We're going to use a filter. Put a filter in him. Try to keep him alive. Try to slow it down. We'll put the filter inside those veins here. Try to slow this down. See if we can keep him alive. Here are the x-rays inside his pelvis.
Sure, 1 hour warning, Mr.
Thank you, Your Honor. I may have to go a little bit into my revulsion.
It's up to you, sir. However you're supposed to do it.
I have to put some rods in and try to straighten them out. This is what you can see out of his good eye, top part. You want to shake his hand, you got to come from up here. You go like this, he doesn't see. That's what he can see. Drop foot in both legs, can't walk. Like these are his feet. Over there. That's it. Got to be pushed around in a wheelchair by a caretaker. who becomes buddy. His wife takes care of him all the time. But in that hospital, first few days, Julie asked, it's amazing. Probably not. Consider the evidence of what she's going through. The pain. It's like a nightmare. It can't be happening to me. This is Julie. It can't be happening to me. This can't be. I got to be strong for everybody. But this can't be happening. It can't be happening. This is my knight in shining armor. It can't be happening. Consider the evidence of what Stephen's going through. Consider the evidence of what Stephen's going through. I used to run marathons. I used to ride my bike hundreds of miles. I used to swim miles. I could lift weights. I could work. I used to urinate like a man. I had a penis once. I gotta walk around in this thing. Man. Like this. I gotta wear protective pants. Protective underwear. For a really long time, I had to urinate in this bag. I got to use this to keep my braces straight so I can walk like Frankenstein and make it look like I can really walk some. I use this thing to grab things because I'm not independent. And this cane to move around. When I go to the shower, I got to get somebody to go in there with me because I can't go in myself. And then I got to sit in this chair here. Consider the indignity of what he has to do every single day, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, no breaks, no holidays, always and forever, until he dies. And it's a revolving door to the hospital. Every month, another infection. Every month, another problem. The phone rings. Julie's worried. She has to have the phone with her all the time. What happened to Stephen? Where's Stephen? Stephen's back in the hospital. Run back to the hospital. Talk to the doctors. Find the best doctors in the world to help Stephen. My life is Stephen. Stephen, 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 Stephen. Why? Because she loves him. She's deathly afraid of ever being alone. Can't think of life without. The law says the greater the damages, again the scale of justice, the greater the harm, the greater the problems. You compensate that based on the evidence with money damages to fix it. Can't bring them back. I mean, if you could, you would. If you could bring them back, the jury said, okay, we find for the plaintiff, we bring back the health, we bring back the happiness, we bring back the joy, we bring back hope. You would. But we don't have it. The only thing the law says you can do is like an ugly eraser. There's a smudge on the wall, let's clean it. Let's clean that smudge. Let's get an eraser. We'll clean it. Oh man, that's ugly. That's okay. That's all we got. Money damages. That's all we got. To fix the problem. The greater the harm, we've got to balance it out with damages. For Julie and for Stephen. The economics and the non-economics. Past medical bills are $3,456,000. Future health care needs, lost wages, and supportive services around the house that Julie lost, that's about $3.8 million. So those two alone, it's a very, very large number. Just that. Just that. Can we go to the photographs in the I want to show you a little bit about their lives together for you to consider as part of the evidence. Here's Stephen in basketball. In high school, right before he got his scholarship to go to California, where he was an all-star in high school and an all-star in college. Next. Look at those eyes. Look at the determination in those eyes. I'm going to be somebody. Go ahead. Falls in love. There they are together, Julie and Stephen. Next. She's showing her engagement ring, by the way. That's what she's saying. Married. Dreams come true. Next one. Next one. We have a family. Beautiful family. Next one. Dancing. They love to dance. They love to dance. Next one. Bar mitzvah. Next one. Together. Next one. Family shop. Next one. Vacations. Next. Vacations. That's a triathlon. At the triathlon. Next one. That's what he looked like. Deep into his 50s, early 60s. Next one. Here he is a month before the accident. Look at him. Handsome, strong. Next one. Here they are together. Next one, please.
You can dance, every dance with the guy that gives you the arm and hold you tight. You can smile, every smile for the man.
Next one, please. Just a month later. Compare and contrast where he was to where he is. Click through these, please. To the rod. Look at his face now. Next one. Next one. Gets that cellulitis thing. Next one. Next. Next. The urinary bag. Next one. That's what he looks like today. Next one. Here's what happened to Julie after the accident. Stands alone. Taking care of Stephen. Next one. That's Stephen's life now. Bring it down. That's an evidence. That's the reality. Considering the evidence, how does one fix that? How do you compensate based on the evidence for that tremendous loss? If health is the most important thing, and they steal health, and if family is the most important thing, and they steal family, due to negligence, due to gross negligence, due to shortcuts, it's fair. I submit that based on the evidence you consider, looking at when the accident happened and how long Stephen would have to live statistically. It happened about January 2009. And from today on, he would live another 13 and a half years. So if you ask Stephen, before he got injured, let's go to Stephen, the day before he gets injured. Stephen, I want to cut a deal with you. Here's what I want to do.
Jack, Your Honor.
Legal basis, sir.
Cannot.
Legal basis.
Relevance.
Okay, rephrase, Mr. Gonzalez. I stand objection.
No reasonable person would ever say, for any amount of money, take away my memory, take away my thought process, take away most of my eyesight, take away my penis, take away my ability to urinate, take away my ability to walk, take my independence, take away my life, make me want to die, for any amount of money. And if that person were given an offer, well, how about if we give you $1 million a year for that pain and suffering, disability, disability?
Objection, Your Honor. You cannot use the value of human life.
Overruled. May continue, sir.
What reasonable person said, yeah, I'll take that.
Just not sidebar, please.
No, you may not. Objection's overruled. Continue, Mr. Gonzalez.
I'll take that deal. So we submit you consider $1 million a year from the date of the accident until the statistical date of passing. A lot of money. For Julie, she lost her life. Taking care of him is her life. What's that one? Based on the evidence. How do you fix that? I want you to consider an amount that would be appropriate for her, for what she has to go through, for what she's lost, for the difficulties she has to sustain. And I submit that something in the $500,000 a year range would be appropriate. From the date of the accident until his statistical date of death. You can award less, obviously, if you think less is appropriate. You can award more if you think more is appropriate. But I suggest to you not to exceed $30 million, including economic damages. Do not exceed $30 million, including the economic damages. I'll have a chance to come up in a few, actually, in about an hour and a half, and discuss a few more points with you. But for now, I want to thank you for your attention during my closing opening. And I'm going to ask you to come back with a verdict, finding for the plaintiff, the defendant was negligent, finding no comparative negligence on Stephen Wolkoff, no negligence on these folks we heard nothing about, and awarding full and complete damages to help fix the problem.